Church Street, right there on the corner. And I was praying, and it's always good. You guys don't even understand. Every time I'm in there, I get fresh revelation from the Lord. It's just really powerful place, an incubator of God's presence on people. So if you've not ever been to a house of prayer, you ought to check it out. It's pretty good. You don't even know how many messages have come to me just sitting in that atmosphere of worship. So sitting there 2 weeks ago, and we're just praying, and I'm just being quiet, sitting, listening, worshiping, and I just felt a sense to ask the Lord what He was doing in Tennessee. If you've read the blog, you've probably heard this, and just recapping it for everybody. Asked Him what He was doing in Tennessee, and I just heard the name Davy Crockett. You guys remember Davy Crockett? Ask my kids how many times they heard his theme song this weekend on vacation. Not enough is the answer. So I heard Davy Crockett, and that made me chuckle because growing up I carried a slingshot and wore a raccoon hat. I love Davy Crockett. We lived in Florida, so we got to go to Disney World, and they have that whole Davy Crockett set up there. That really, I just loved it as a kid. So it made me chuckle because it was a little bit nostalgic. But I asked the Lord again, and I heard Davy Crockett. So I looked up Davy on my phone, and I was reminded of his name, his moniker, King of the Wild Frontier. You guys remember that? Davy Crockett. Everybody who's my age and older is going to be singing Davy Crockett's theme song today. And if you've not ever seen Davy Crockett, they probably don't have it on Netflix, but you should go back and watch the series. It's pretty entertaining. So anyhow, I looked at it. As soon as I read King of the Wild Frontier, I heard the Lord. He said, I am raising up pioneers from Tennessee to send out into the earth. Amen. To send out into every frontier of this world to establish my kingdom. And that got me pretty excited. That got me pretty excited. You want to know something? Here's some insider trading. This world is falling apart. It's crazy, isn't it? Man, I don't even watch the news anymore because it's so out of control. It's like, if you want to be depressed, just spend 45 minutes in front of News Channel 5 or CNN or even Fox or whatever news channel you want to watch. Just spend 45 minutes and you will have a pessimistic outlook on everything, guaranteed. Okay? So that's my advice. If you want to be bummed out about life, go watch the news for a good time. Right? So, anyhow, this world's falling apart. It's radical, the depravity that even our nation is falling into. Right? It's becoming egregious to assign gender to people as they're born in our culture. That's radically depraved. It is. And we know what's going to happen, right? The Lord said, you are the light of the world, so clearly the rest of the world is in darkness, and we are called to facilitate the light. But it's kind of alarming at times to think, geez, 50 years ago, you were allowed to believe in traditional marriage. You were allowed to believe that men are men and women are women. And now if you do that, you're kind of you're canceled. Right? It's wild. It's radical. But how many of you know God is not intimidated? In fact, He's not even a little bit worried. He's not oh no, everything's out of control. What are we going to do? Send angels, send heavenly hosts, do something. No, He's not worried. He's still on the throne. In fact, as He sees radical decline of humanity, His plan is to raise up radical men and women who will pioneer the kingdom in the darkness. Right? How many of you know we're part of a pioneering movement? Did you know that? Did you know that the directors of Cahill, Josh, and Olivia, they pioneered Cahill with nothing? They lived on the side of a Mexican highway with no door on their house. It's a pretty wild story, actually. Olivia talks about sweeping the day's dust out of their home only to have it come back in by evening. But they did it. They pioneered it because God told them to. Right? And I actually believe that same zeal, that same intensity and radical love for Jesus is going to grip people in this state and in this church to do things as great and even greater if we'll allow them to. See, Christianity is not a passive idea. Following Christ is not passive or complacent. Like, you can't do this and not expect to give everything away to see radical things happen around you. You just can't. That's not Christianity. That's not what Christ paid for you to have. Christ didn't go to the cross so that you can show up to that seat every Sunday and sing as many worship songs as you feel like you can sing before you get uncomfortable. That's not what he paid for. He didn't say, I came to give you mediocrity and mediocrity abundantly, did he? No. And at the same time, he didn't stop the world from being filled with darkness. He said, despite everything happening in your life, I've come to give you life and life abundantly. So start living like it. Start pursuing what I paid for you to have. I'm raising up pioneers who will not be comfortable settling for less than what I paid for. I think he's doing that in this church. I think he's raising up pioneers that he'll send into every frontier of the earth to establish the kingdom in places of deep darkness. Amen. Okay, so go back and read that law. It'll help you for what I'm going to preach about next. So what are kingdom pioneers? What does that mean exactly? Well, I wrote some things down. Kingdom pioneers are men and women who are radical in their zeal for Jesus and establishing his kingdom. Okay? That's where kingdom pioneers start. Radicalism. You know, if people can lose their lives for a lie, well, why can't Christians live radically their lives in the truth? Right? Like, people will fly planes into buildings for a lie. And we can't live our life radically with the truth. Come on. Kingdom pioneers are people who are not willing to settle for common, normal, or comfortable, but are jealous to obtain all of what Jesus paid for on the cross for themselves and the communities they've been placed in. So your mission doesn't end with you. You know, it's important to get yourself right. Right? Like the commandment was to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So you got to get yourself right. But did you know it doesn't end with you? You have an obligation, if you're loving your neighbor, to bring kingdom transformation into the places you've been planted. Did you know that? You're obligated from heaven. If you are loving your neighbors, love looks like something. Love doesn't look like, oh, bless their heart from a distance. Love looks like you engaging their life and being manifest Jesus in a way they don't deserve. That's what love does. Amen. People who refuse the status quo, even if the status people who refuse the status quo, if the status quo compromises the kingdom expanding around them. Do you get that? Do you get, if it's normal in the culture but it doesn't bring the kingdom, then it can't be normal to you. Do you hear me? If you're living in this culture, and this culture is in compromise to the kingdom, then it has to change in you. People who are not concerned with being well-liked and approved by other men and approved by the culture, but they are people who are willing to be set apart and even ridiculed at times for the sake of a lifestyle of righteousness. Want another little secret? If you don't have people criticizing you for the kingdom's sake, I mean, you need to look at, I'm not kidding. I'm not trying to create some sort of religion here where you have to do stuff to earn his love. But you may have to look in the mirror if you don't have people who are critiquing your lifestyle because it looks too much like Jesus.
They are people who run into problems and see opportunity for kingdom solutions. They're the kind of people problems are afraid of. That's what kingdom pioneers do. When they encounter problems, it does not give them permission to give up. They see problems as opportunities for the kingdom to expand through their lives. The kind of people who see brokenness and are filled with hope, because brokenness allows the possibility for restoration. Do you have brokenness in your life? Come on. I don't have to make a bet to know that one. I know you do. Did you know that your brokenness is a vehicle to Jesus' restoration coming into your life? But first you have to acknowledge that you have brokenness. Kingdom pioneers see brokenness and get excited because they know that if they submit that brokenness to the king, then his kingdom will be established. People who are not concerned with the voice of their critics, just the voice of the Father. I don't care what the news says. I don't care what culture says about Christianity and Jesus. I really don't. In fact, when they say things, when they persecute and ridicule, I know that we're moving in the right direction. If I'm not facing opposition, then I might be moving with culture instead of against it. People who are not worried about results or what they will get out of every situation. Rather, they are people who are burning for intimacy with Jesus in such a way they are eager to give away everything to anyone in order to gain more of him. Sometimes I'm my biggest enemy. I get in my way because I want so much. I want recognition. I want the approval of people. I want something out of every situation. People of Christ give everything away. That's why they were so transformative in the first church. The Roman government could not deal with the fact there was a people who were willing to go to the sick, who were willing to go to the poor, who were willing to go to the places that society had outcast. People who will speak truth in love in the midst of lies, regardless of the cost. People who refuse to fear the unknown because they know if they have heaven with them, then they have influence that can change the world. Did Jesus die to get you to heaven? It's not a true question. Kind of, not really. He died to put heaven in you. So if you put heaven in you, then where is there a place on earth that can stop what God is doing in you? It's not a true question, but there's nowhere. People who don't wait until it's safe because there is no excuse persuasive enough to stop them, and there's no mistake they can make big enough to overcome their God. People who have already died to themselves, picked up their cross, and decided to follow Jesus, and they're not looking back. Jesus is raising up kingdom pioneers from Tennessee to send out to every frontier of the earth to establish his kingdom in preparation for his return. So Jesus is raising up pioneers. Who's a pioneer? About 50%. Hopefully the rest of you will feel called to pioneer by the end of this message. So pioneer is a person or a group of people who originate or help open up a new line of thought, activity, or lifestyle or development. To pioneer is to open or prepare the way for others to follow. Yes. Okay? That's what we're called to. That's what we do here at First Church. We're pioneers. Jesus was a pioneer. He came into humanity to infuse a very broken human culture with a very real, perfect, and superior kingdom culture. He didn't come here to keep things the same, did he? He came to replace and establish. But this is aggressive language. Did you know Jesus was radical in what he did? He then, this is the good part, he then commissioned and empowered very broken and simple men and women to participate with him in his venture. Come on. Come on. One knows a little secret about David Crockett. He had like a third grade education. He was really a bad public speaker. It's like very simple, plain, kind of like me. Right? You know, he was in Congress. He made it to politics. People didn't like him because he stood up for righteousness. Like, who can stop you? God is with you. So Jesus commissioned and gave authority to very simple men, very simple women like you and me. And then he bestowed his authority on them so that he could partner with them in establishing his kingdom and pioneering his kingdom on the earth. Just like today, the disciples lived in a very corrupt, perverse world system. You guys really need to read some history about ancient Rome so you can understand what they went through. Imagine being, there's so many little kids in here, but imagine the most horrific death you could endure for the sake of Jesus. That's what first church Christians went through on a daily basis. Think about it. That's how corrupt and disgusting the culture they lived in was. But just like today, Jesus did not see that culture and resign and just say, oh, well, they're just too far gone. He didn't, did he? He put his mark and his identity on men and women just like you and me to continue the cause and the mantle of establishing his kingdom on earth. Mark 3, verses 13 through 15. I'm just going to paraphrase this real quick before we get into our scripture. Jesus calls his disciples to him, and he gives them the permission to preach the gospel, but also the authority to cast out demons throughout all the earth. And he calls them apostles. It's an interesting name, right? We're an apostolic ministry. We believe we have authority and permission to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. Why did he call them apostles? Does anybody know where that word comes from? It's not a Hebrew word. An apostle was a Roman official that was sent to Rome to assimilate the culture that was just conquered by Rome into Roman culture. So for instance, Israel was conquered by Rome, by the Roman government. The Romans, Caesar, or the Roman emperor, sent out his apostles to assimilate the Israelite people into living underneath Roman rule. So you can imagine when Jesus called his disciples apostles, they were like, dude, what's up with that? Those guys, they're like, we don't like them. They conquered us. And those are the bad guys. And I'm sure Jesus probably took them to a side and said, no, guys, you don't get it. You were conquered and assimilated by apostles, but I want you to know you're more than conquerors. You're called not only to conquer the dark places of the earth, but to assimilate them back to the kingdom where you came from. To assimilate them back into what they were designed to be. See, he wouldn't have used this word apostle if it didn't have the weight behind it of being able to influence from a superior kingdom. So you can imagine that these disciples who felt weak and broken by this conquering nation, Rome, heard this and thought, oh gee, we're scared of those guys. And Jesus goes, no. The thing that the enemy used to conquer you with, I'm going to use to establish my kingdom through you. He wanted his disciples to understand where they were working from, had authority and influence in the earth. That even though they felt defeated and conquered, they had authority from a superior kingdom to change the culture around them. But in order to do that, they had to leave what they knew, let go of being victims, and walk into what he was calling them to. You got to understand this. It doesn't matter how you feel about your circumstances. It doesn't. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how beat up you feel by the world. It doesn't matter how bad you think you have it. You're called to be a pioneer. Come on, you got to break the victim mentality off of your life. You do. I'm going to show you in a second, but if you're walking in the victim mentality, you're walking in sin. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so blunt, but it's true. You're walking in disobedience. You're walking in faith of the world, not in faith of the Father. Go to John 5. The Gospel of John, chapter 5. You guys read it? Verse 1. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. It's a long time. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" Verse 7, "I can't," sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me." Stop there. Okay. So here we have the scene. We're at the pool of Bethesda. The tradition or the culture is that when the angels descend, they bubble up the pool, and then the pool has healing properties, and everybody rushes to get into that pool so that they can get healed. So you have all these sick, blind, lame, crippled, probably lepers, all these different people swarming the pool in order to get their healing, right? And then along comes Jesus. He sees this culture, he sees this tradition, and he walks right into it. Now, I don't know what this would look like, but I imagine it says that there's all these people laying around there. Did he have to walk over some? Did he have to like sidestep a few to get to this guy who'd been laying there for 4 decades? Right? He finds the guy who's the most defeated, the one that's been sitting there for 40 years, and goes right to him. Right? See, this is a culture of oppression. These people have learned how to be comfortable in their brokenness because they believe in a man-made tradition that's gotten them to flock there. It's true. Jesus sees it and he goes right into it. And not only does he go right into it, but he goes to the person who's the most defeated. The dude that's been laying around for 40 years. He walks up to him and he asks the most offensive life question you could ever ask him. Do you want to get well? Oh, gee, I don't know. I've just been laying here for 40 years, dude. What do you think? He comes right up to him and he asks him. And he doesn't ask him because he's unaware. He's like, I don't know if you really want to get well. Do you really want it? No, he asks him because he wants to expose the brokenness of his heart. Right? Because he asks him, and what does the guy do? He doesn't answer. He gives him his excuses. This is why I can't get what I want. This is why I can't be who I want to be. This is why this will never work in my life. Everybody else's problem, I can't own this because it's not fair. The circumstances are built against me. Whew. Come on, I'm not here to pick on anybody. I'm the same way. When things are hard, I want to blame everything else around me. How many of you know that this guy got here because he was looking for what he needed in something else but Jesus? But he stayed there because he blamed everybody else for a problem he was meant to change himself. It's the truth. What if, just sit with me for a second, what if God has not made you a victim to your circumstance? What if God has designed you so that your circumstances are victim to his kingdom working through you? I think he's a little bit smarter than we give him credit for. You know, he knows your brokenness. He knows things that you don't know how to handle. Which is, you know that he's not intimidated by those things like you are. In fact, he sees them and he goes, perfect. I'll use that one to break off broken sexuality on the earth. Perfect. I'll use that one to break off depression and anxiety off the earth. Perfect. I'll use that one to break corruption off of the different places of corruption on the earth. And he finds people who are struggling with the things he wants to overcome, and he confronts them because he wants to take them out of the victim mentality, to see who he is, to stop looking at the earth for healing that doesn't come from the earth, to know him. He says to that guy, you want to get well? I don't know. I mean, 4 decades, you tell me. What does Jesus say? Verse 8, Jesus told him, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. He gives him an ultimatum. He doesn't even respond to the victim mentality that this guy is spewing out. Doesn't even give it any answer. He just says, you have a choice. Get up and leave this, or don't. See, we can trust ourselves and continue doing the same things we know how to do. Or trust him and walk into something we don't know how to do. God hasn't walked for 40 years. Don't know how to walk. Verse 9, instantly the man was healed. Hallelujah. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking away. But this miracle happened on Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. See, in the world, there's never a good time for Jesus to do what he wants to do in your life. Never is. There'll always be a critic. There'll always be somebody cynical to what God is doing. There's always going to be somebody doing that angry face on our Facebook live stream. There's always going to be somebody who's mad because God is doing something in your life that they're jealous of. But you know what? The guy picked up his mat, and one prisoner walked out of his prison cell in front of all the other inmates. You see, when you do what God has called you to do, regardless of the cards that have been dealt to you, it causes something to happen in the atmosphere around you. We know Jesus caused the scene because when this happened, it caught the attention of the religious people. And you can imagine all those sick people that Jesus just walked over, see this guy who's been there for 40 years, every day laying on the mat. Well, when's it going to be my time? When's it going to be my time? Have one encounter with Jesus, pick up his mat, and begin to walk. Freedom is demonstrated. And of course, for the religious folks, it's the wrong time, the wrong way, from the wrong person. But you know what? Jesus is not working on your time. He's not working with your social circles. He doesn't care about your schedule. I'm sorry. He's not waiting to see when you have an open space in your week. He's doing something right now, but he's waiting for you to take your eyes off yourself, look at him, and go where he's called you to go. Pick up your mat and walk. It's time for you to leave the prison cell so the rest of the prisoners can see what I can do. Verse 11. But he replied, the man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk. Who said such a thing as that? They demanded. Verse 13, the man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, now you are well, so stop sinning, or something even worse may happen to you. Then the man went and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had healed him. Weird. Why would, what sin? I mean, what's a shoplifting? Crippled 4 years, right? Wasn't running from the law. What was he doing? What was his sin? Why did Jesus tell him to stop sinning? He'd been laying on the mat for 40 years. His sin was he allowed himself to become a victim when he was created to be more than a conqueror. So Jesus says this, so you can go back to what you know, but I promise you, everything that comes with it will be added back. Or you can continue to what I've called you to and know something you never knew was possible to happen in your life. You see, you have to walk away from that victim mentality. If you're going to pioneer, you have to walk away from believing the world gets to define your circumstances, not you defining the circumstances of the world around you. And you know what? We know this guy does because he goes back to the religious leaders and he's like, hey boys, guess what? Jesus has healed me. I'm done laying at this pool. I'm walking out of here. You know, sometimes you've got to stand up to your biggest critics. Sometimes you've got to stand up to that religious spirit who tells you you need to lay back down where you're supposed to be because you'll never be what you're called to. You can rest in the fact that if Jesus calls you, he'll take care of the details to get you where you're going. Remember, he said, pick up your mat. Why did he tell him to pick up this dirty mat he's been laying off for 40 years? Because he didn't have a shopping cart to push it, right? Sorry. Because the mat is where that man found his rest. He had learned to rest in a broken victim cycle that did nothing for him. But when you're following Jesus, you carry your resting place with you. Did you know that? Anxiety doesn't come from following from going where you know you're supposed to be. Anxiety comes from thinking it's the wrong time, it's the wrong hour, you're not doing it the right way, the people that you're supposed to have aren't there, the resources haven't added up. That's where anxiety comes from. It's by being influenced by a broken world system. Rest comes from going where God has called you to go. If you feel stir crazy, if you feel like you're not being fulfilled, if you're not satisfied, I'll tell you why. It's because you decided to lay down and rest where you were never called to lay down and rest. It's true. I'm telling you, it'll never get easy. He'll never do it for you. Jesus is never going to scoop his arm down, straighten your legs out, and move your legs on your behalf. You're going to have to do that part. You're never going to have the right situation with the perfect storm of all the design elements in your head that you think should happen so that you can do what you're called to do. That's never going to happen. There's never going to be a cheerleading section behind you going, yeah, go, we love you. I'm so happy you're doing what God called you. That's never going to happen. But you still have to make the choice. I'm going to sit where I've sat for 40 years. I'm going to sit where I've sat for 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, or I'm going to pick up my mat and learn to rest in where God has called me to go. Lord, we thank you that you're raising up pioneers. But today, Lord, we thank you that you're breaking the victim mentality off of our lives. Here's the thing I've found, that in the church, we don't voice our victim orphan mentality, but we live it. We do. We know well enough, we've been in church long enough to know that there's a language I can't use to express my heart, because then I'll be identified as an orphan or victim or whatever else. But we live like that. And I know that because I'm just as guilty as everybody sitting in here. I've done it. I've done it. But how many of you know that if Jesus calls you to do something, he's already provided everything you need to do it? That's the truth. He's not like that. He doesn't send people out with not enough. Understand what I'm saying? He's resourcing you from heaven, not from earth. We have a Papa who provides from top to bottom, not bottom to top. I think we're going to get the worship team going. And I just want to make some space for us to respond. If you've dealt with that victim mentality, where you just feel like you need things to work in the right way in order for you to do what God has called you to do, I want you to break that off of yourself today. I want this to be the pick up your mat and walk moment in your life. I want this to be the day where you never live the same way you lived yesterday, because now you know you are called to something larger than you're used to. And I'm not going to do church as defined by American church culture. We're called to pioneer. We're called to see something happen bigger than we can ever produce in our own way. But it only comes from people being obedient to what God has called them to, not being concerned with all the elements around them that don't make a perfect scenario for us to go where He said go. So if you need that broken off of you, I want you to come up. And then also, if you feel a stir in your heart to pioneer, to go into the frontiers nobody else will go to go to the place